Sunday we talked about, will this year be a fat cow year, a lean cow year? We're going to give a count regardless. But how do we live in each? And each has its own set of challenges. Um, that sermon had more feedback than most sermons I preach. And I ended up writing a bunch of emails from people going, how about this? The number one question I got was, 2026 looks like it's going to be a lean cow year. What do I do? How do I cope? So this is initial thoughts, and I'm open to dialogue on this one a lot. Some random, incomplete, hopefully practical advice grounded in experience and God's word. So let's dig in. I think there are 4 key things that we can do when we face a lean cow year. The first is, let's just acknowledge the reality of it, that it's a lean cow time. I'm going to talk in terms of church a little bit rather than individuals, but I have been in churches that cannot manage the change that they have been through. So I remember a church back in Chicago, and they used to be a blowing and going church, 750, full grade school and everything else. And then the neighborhood changed, the congregation moved to the suburbs, the people moved to the suburbs, and they were still trying to staff like their volunteers on their council. They were down to about 100 people, and at that level, the church council is kind of like, a bunch of people getting together and making decisions. That's legitimate way of governing at that size. But they are still trying to build 4-person boards for everything, because when you were at 750, that's what you needed. And they were like, we can't get people to volunteer. And it's like, well, I'm volunteering on 4 different committees already to make up the 4-person that we need on each one. Let's cope with reality. Redefining what's doable, not going it alone, and finally, taking care of yourself is not a sin. So first off is acknowledging reality. Let's go back to the 7 cows. Joseph, when he is brought up and tells Pharaoh, this is it, he says, the dream was given to you 2 ways, because it's not just the cows. What was the other one? It was grain. Yeah, wheat or corn. I think the King James said corn, but corn we know is a New World thing. So when they said corn in the King James, they meant wheat, barley, anything like that. And the good years came first, the lean years came second. But Joseph tells Pharaoh, you got it in 2 ways, because this is firmly decided. So in other words, Pharaoh, wrap your head around this. This is your new reality. And this is a real struggle for real people. And because we tend to see hard times as an interruption rather than this is my new normal. Because who wants to live in a rough time? So, but acknowledging it allows us to stop fighting against our new reality and living in denial. So, we tell ourselves, how often do you walk up to somebody, you say, how you doing? I'm okay. Yeah, I'm fine. And they're not, and don't get me wrong, sometimes it's the handshake line in church. You're not going to have this deep, come to Jesus moment right there. It's just, yeah, we're fine. But we also sometimes assume there should be a quick fix. This is sometimes called the gambler's fallacy. This is, I have lost, I have lost, I have lost, I have lost. I am due to win. And therefore, I'm going to double down. And they lose twice as much, because sometimes you can't fix it quick. Life has changed. Here's a funny example from my life. I did not cope well with my with becoming needing readers. Just didn't want to wear readers, didn't want to carry them. And so I would complain about, we need better light in here, because if I could get like really, really good light, I didn't need my readers, right? Or, if with Gail, I was like, Gail, we need brighter paper, so we need a clear, And it was finally like, no, let's just cope with reality and, put readers everywhere that you can ever be and you'll be fine. Um, and so sometimes the first step is just going, okay, this is my new reality. Um, I'm not happy about it, um, but let's actually face into the reality of it. And trust that God can still work in this new reality. And that allows our prayers to change from God, take me back to my old reality. And when God doesn't do that, we end up saying, God didn't hear my prayer. God didn't listen to me. No, we're facing a new phase of life, a new challenge. And as a result, we just have to cope. Um, sweet Rowena came up to me. She goes, I'm so sorry you got the celiac, and I'm like, it's fine. It really is. But there were other folks who were like, I can't bring the pastor Christmas cookies. My life is changed. I'm like, it'll be fine. Judy can still have cookies, but maybe half as well, actually, probably about a quarter as many because I was about 3 to her 1 when we got cookies, and they were like, oh, it's fine. I can cope with this. In fact, I just had my most recent test and they said, your small intestine is healthy. And I went, great. And they went, no, that doesn't mean you're cured. It means you're being good. I was hoping. So the first step is just going, this is reality now. I'm not happy about it, but how do I find happiness in this as opposed to just kicking against the goads and saying, I want my old life back when old life's not coming back. Make sense so far? Okay. Steps for acknowledging the reality. It's a lean season. This may include kindly silencing those people who want to paper over your reality because they are uncomfortable with it. When my father-in-law died and then my mother-in-law died, Judy was understandably sad. She was mourning. And there were people, because she was leading in music at the time, that were like, you need to get over it or get out of the way. And I was like, no, she's coping, she's still leading, she's doing everything right. But it was like, and then pastor thought came because the Holy Spirit dope slapped me. And I went, oh, these are people who have not lost a parent yet. And they are scared to death of what's going to happen to them. Because as we started to talk, it was like, well, I'm not going to be like that when this happens. And I'm like, oh, this is what's going on. Okay. We have to be gracious with each other because just because I'm uncomfortable with what you're dealing with doesn't mean let's just get you fixed and get you back to normal. There's a great book that got written 30 years ago now called Don't Sing Songs to a Heavy Heart. And it was Christian caregiving guides to say, when you're dealing with someone who's mourning, the promises of the resurrection are fine, but they're still missing the person here on earth. And saying, you're going to get to see him again in heaven doesn't fix that. They're still going to be sad here and now, and you can't fix that for them. So admitting that allows us to make the necessary accommodation, realizing that something has to give in the light of these new circumstances. It might be that we're going to walk along with somebody who's walking with a limp for a while because they're coping with something hard in their life. And so when, their temper gets short and you're like, just dial it back. It's okay. I get it. Let's just work on this. Let me tell you a funny story though. So we had a guest a few weeks ago, and I was doing my thing, cup of coffee, greeting people in the parking lot, and I greeted her, learned her name. I don't remember what it is right now. Went in, introduced her to Harold or somebody else, and so she was introduced around to a few people in the lobby. Went in, sat down in the church, and then she was relating this to Renette Berggren, and Renette told me this morning. She said, and then I looked around, and this guy in robes starts walking down the aisle, and I went, that's the parking lot attendant. What's he doing leading church? So, sometimes people need a little help up the steps. And that's why I'm out there. One of the reasons is just we're going to accommodate each other. 20 years ago, I didn't need to say, hey, if you're not feeling steady on your feet, everybody could get up and take communion. And now it's like, no, this is who we are. Redefining doing what's doable. Number 2, do what's doable is always good advice. But in lean times, we have to figure out what's our new doable. So the easiest one to think of, financial downturn, and all of a sudden we have to belt tighten. Instead of saying, I'm going to pretend my life is still going great and putting it on credit. And just say, yeah, this is the reality of what I'm facing. Or health changes, Um, one of the scriptures I read with Ed Tomac, or read to Ed Tomac, he was kind of out of it. I love Ecclesiastes 12. Did not understand it when I was younger. Ecclesiastes 12 is this beautiful poetic description of old age. And it kind of personifies the city, but it's also people. And it's saying, look, these changes are occurring. You're not hearing the sounds anymore. It's just getting quiet. But one of the things they talk about is suddenly men will become afraid of heights. And in my neighborhood now, there are people who are going, yeah, I'm not putting Christmas lights on my roof anymore. Hiring somebody to do it, or, I borrow the kid from down the street who loves doing that. But a fall for me, man, that would be hard. And so anyhow, there's realities. I need nightlights around my house now so that I don't run into things and have a fall and have that whole catastrophic thing. But here's an example. I dealt with this particularly with my father-in-law. Judy's dad died with dementia. We don't know what kind. This was before they did tests to figure out if it was Alzheimer's or not. We did not think it was necessary to have a autopsy to figure it out. So redefining what's doable was the lab where I learned that one. Because I'd have my mother-in-law on the phone saying, I told him to take his pills and I got home and he hadn't taken his pills. I'm like, okay, he can't do this anymore. He can't learn or remember new things. So that's no longer a doable thing. Even setting an alarm and having the alarm go off, he would be like, what's that alarm going off for? And he couldn't remember alarm means take pills. So she had to make some shifts and some changes. Here's another one. This one occurred to me, and this again, Holy Spirit just dope slapped me in the middle of a home visit. One of Judy's coworkers in the real estate office had a mother at home, and I would make Lutheran. They belonged to a different tribe, but we liked each other. And so she would say, would you come by and bring communion to my mom? I'd be honored. And her mom was living with her. They had been in New Orleans, and her husband had painted ships. That's what he did, and he was good. He painted the inside of ships, but he was constantly surrounded by lead fumes from the paint back then, and he was starting to have real problems. And the doctor said, you got to get a new line of work. So they moved out on the bayou, opened a bait shop, and that's what they did. Clean living out on the bayou, and rented boats, sold bait, did that kind of stuff. But she would tell me the story every time I visited of how they would close down the bait shop at 6 o'clock on Saturday, and they would go upstairs to their apartment, and they would turn Lawrence Welk on, and they would dance together in the kitchen. Just this sweet, heartwarming story. I mean, just lovely. And at one point, I hear her daughter, my wife's coworker, going, Mom, you told that story to the pastor 100 times. And it was like I said, Holy Spirit dope slap, where I was like, it's okay. I love hearing this story. And that's when I realized that communication is not always about exchange of data. Sometimes it's just about that feeling, and it's about community that comes from hearing the same old story again. Um, and sometimes, don't get me wrong, it can be irritating. But if you can step back from that and say, what's now doable? So with my mom, we talk very little about what's happened recently. She no longer follows the news at 101. She will tell me what I said wrong on this morning. I will get notes on how to lead church better and preach better. Um, so it's why I don't call until Tuesday, because on Sunday those notes are fresh, and I prefer that they age out a little bit. But here's the question that works great with my mom. Tell me about how you and Dad met. Now I remember a story about goldfish and a blizzard. Oh yeah, that was your dad wanted to give me this present, and he got me a goldfish bowl and goldfish. But when he got off the bus, he didn't think it was 20 below zero, and he's walking this goldfish to me, and it's spilling all over his coat. So his coat froze and I won't bore you with the rest of the story, but it's just one of those great stories, right? And it's like, oh, this is what that story she remembers. In fact, if I was to tell that story as a sermon illustration, I don't know why I would, but if I came to it, I would have to say, here's how I remember it, because I will get notes going, that's not exactly true. um, so how do we shift, right? With my mother-in-law, when I would call her to check on her, I learned, don't ask, how are you? Because that led my mother-in-law to a long litany of everything that was wrong, broken, hurt, and how disappointed she was with the food at the assisted living facility. And so we had to start. My opening gambit could not be this casual conversation that you start with most people. How you doing? It had to be like, tell me about bingo today, or something else that I knew she loved. And then we could start positively. And later on, she could tell me, they serve carrots again, and I hate carrots. Yes, I know, Elaine, you hate carrots. So redefining what's doable and thinking creatively so that people can be included when things have changed. And not just saying, I'm mad because you can't do what you used to do. Um, you know, Judy and I had the blessing of, all those years of endurance training and suddenly going, I can't do that anymore. And that was one of those things where we started to go, oh, yeah. And there's going to be not just that, but there's going to be this and this other thing and this other thing. We see that. So, third thing, don't do it alone. Basic scripture, right? God had made everything. It's all perfect. He puts Adam in the middle of the garden, and we have the first flaw in creation. It's not good for the man to be alone. Lean times can lead us to isolate ourselves. And sometimes, that can happen for a couple of reasons. One, we may be really wrapped up in just coping with the lean time that we're dealing with. And as a result, we don't take time for relationships because I am just scrambling to take care of things. I'll tell one story here. I tell everybody when I visit them, nursing home, hospital, or something, your story is your story to tell. I will not take information back to the church unless you want me. And what specific things do you want me to share? I'm not going to say, well, it was such and such and such. And, this came from early on in my ministry. Okay. Guy came up to me and said, I'm going to have surgery this week. Would you please pray for me? And he meant, would I, John, pray for him? And I went, of course. What I heard was, would you please pray in the prayers of the church for, and so I did. And then people went to the hospital to visit him, and he'd had a massive hemorrhoidectomy, and he was really embarrassed about the position he had to be in to greet guests. And he was rightfully angry at me for sharing his story when all he wanted was just me to pray. So there's that. Sometimes we're busy coping. There's also clumsy friends like me, or think of Job's friends who come and they try to fix things. Oh, I'm so sorry you have diabetes, but I saw this guy on YouTube and he said if you eat this, you can wipe out your diabetes. And just so, and it's like sometimes it's like, trust me, no, really, I've looked at all these things already. My doctor, I've asked my doctor that same thing, and he was like, that's not the kind of diabetes you have. Okay, that's not going to fix you. Um, so, okay. So there's times when you're going, alone would be better than bad friends. And that's on us to be good friends as opposed to people who come up and go, oh, a stroke. I remember when so and so had a stroke and they just, he peed himself for years and it was horrible. And you're like, back off. Okay. Um, but there are different classes, for lack of a better word, of companionship, and they serve different needs. This still tracking? This still making sense? Okay. Um, First off, there's community, like a congregation. This is a group of people, and belonging and participating in that community helps in a couple of different ways. First off, you're going to maybe join in something that's not related to your loss. And you're just going to say, I'm going to go sing in the choir, and for an hour, I'm going to be working on singing rather than thinking about this particular thing. So it's a change of focus escape. Um, there are also mental and physical benefits from just plain serving others. Um, and finally, in the community, it's sometimes possible to just be me and not be the embodiment of what's broken and changed in my life. The illustration I want to give here is my father called me and said, I would like you and your church to pray for me. I have cancer. Okay, we will do that. And as we talk, and I'm like, okay, and it was prostate. He died of something else, and still had the prostate cancer. They took care of it, but, slow growing cancer, all that. But I was like, well, what does your pastor say? I haven't told him. Why haven't you told your pastor? He said, because I want to just go to church and be me. I don't want to be guy with cancer. And I have seen how me and my friends treat people when they have something, it's like guy with heart attack, guy with cancer. And the first thing that people do is they come up and they go, how's your cancer? And, or, oh, how's this? And he said, I just want to be me. So I'm going to have your church pray for me out in Colorado. This is before we were online. And he said, that way I'm prayed for. But at the same time, I don't have to become reduced to my symptoms or my disease. And I went, oh, I'm going to file that one away. That seems like an important thing. So sometimes in community, if I'm dealing with something, I just get to be me. And I don't have to be, oh, yeah, the guy that has celiac or the person who does this or the person who's mourning. I can just come and be and participate. There's a benefit and a blessing there. Next one is friendship. This one is tough. If you've read Bowling Alone or any of those books, you know that friendships are really strained and have been since the 80s. The number of particularly men that have more than one friend is really, really tiny. And when you ask many of those men who their friend is, they say it's their spouse. So this is why I will tell you repeatedly, the time we spend in the lobby can be just as important as the time we spend in the sanctuary. Because loneliness is an epidemic. It's about the equivalent, somebody said, of smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day when it came to impacting health. So primary relationships like friendships where we know the other person and they know us. If you don't have a friend, 2 things. 1, start praying for one. 2, start being friendly. And because as Ann Landers or Dear Abby, I forget which one, always used to say, the best way to have a friend is to be one. This is where we are known deeply. Sometimes it's going to be the shoulder we cry on. But sometimes in a good friendship, it's not going to be about me for once. It's going to be about what somebody else is dealing with and what's going on in my friend's life. And once again, both the good and the bad. And I get to take my mind off myself and focus on my friend. And it allows me to survive well in a lean cow year by saying, I'm going to. So my friend Rick over at The Journey, my best friend, he is a pastor, and that church is in the process of leaving its denomination. The denomination started to do some power grab stuff, and the congregation, which is made up mostly of new Christians, said, why are we participating in this? And they went to national and said, hold it, time out, this does not match this. Here's the confessions of the Christian Reformed Church, and we seem to be breaking from them. And we were pretty much told, sit down, shut up, and they went, we're leaving. So there's times that I talk with Rick and I say very little because he is in the middle of processing what it's like to pastor a congregation that has to leave what was his church home. He was born and raised in this denomination, but it's changed, and now he's coping with that. So Paul's advice to the Romans is still good. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. That's part of friendship, is being in that, no, I know you, you know me, and sometimes we're going to talk about my problems, sometimes we're going to talk about your problems, sometimes we're going to talk about something else altogether, and neither one of us is going to talk about our problems. We're just going to hang out. Okay. Don't do it alone. I'm a big fan of professional help because neither living in a community nor friends are therapists. First off, it's an unfair burden to lay on them. And then second of all, they are not trained, or very few of them are, and can easily make things worse by doing things that aren't helpful. Whereas therapists are trained to be a safe place to work on hard stuff. And doing work with a therapist allows us to kind of dump stuff there with someone, and we are going to pay them. So think of it like paying to have your trash hauled out. Okay? I'm going to write a check to my therapist at the end, and that's okay. She's responsible for removing this. And it allows us to deal with our emotional baggage in private so we can be emotionally present when we have to be back in the situation. My example is I worked with a therapist called Marilyn during when we had a youth worker that hurt kids in the congregation. We weren't aware of it. He moved away, hurt kids someplace else, eventually got arrested, went on trial, big public thing. One of the things I did when this started was I called Concordia Plans, the people who do my insurance, and I said, I need a therapist in my area. And they sent me a list, and I looked down and I picked Marilyn, and I went in and she was like, why are you here? And I said, because right after I moved to Colorado, I watched a Lutheran church in Littleton melt down. So one of the shooters at Columbine was tangentially related to, I forget the name of the Lutheran church down in Littleton. His mom and dad were still members. He had given up on it. I'm not sure if he was confirmed or not. And I don't remember which shooter it was because I don't remember shooters' names. But I watched that pastor just implode. And he, just ended up in the news. He ended up in this. And it just ripped him apart. And he melted down in public. And it wasn't pretty. And I went, that was a highly stressful situation. This guy did not cope well. I need to make sure two things. One, I don't melt down in public because this is got me, I'm questioning my judgment. I trusted this guy. I am mad as all get out at him. I am thinking deeply unchristian thoughts about him. I need to cope with this. I hired a therapist so that I could go to that dark place, deal with it there. So when I came back to church and somebody was like, I am mad at this guy, I am thinking unchristian thoughts about him, and I could listen and be present, as opposed to going, yeah, me too, and then escalating the whole thing. So therapy, I'm a big fan. And it doesn't have to be like super expensive. Marilyn was not a psychiatrist. She was not interested in my sex life or my dreams or anything like that. But she did help me process all sorts of things that were related to this so that I could be present for the congregation. And not only that, but sometimes from the community, because other people that had been hurt in a similar situation started calling this church, because they still needed to tell their story, and the church they went to shut things down and said, we're not going to talk about this. And so they would call up and I would hear their story, and I go, and I didn't have to fix anything. I just had to say, I'm so sorry. And what's going on? The saddest thing I dealt with, I figured, I reported up my chain of command to the district. I reported up, even called Synod, and said, this is what I'm dealing with. And Gail can remember these stories. And I said, help. And they went, that'd be a really good idea. We should put something together. So yeah, they were not ready. So I cobbled some things together from some other friends, and it was really useful. And then we worked our way through that. But one of the reasons I was able to do that was because I was seeing Marilyn once a week, and that's where I did my hard work. So big fan of therapy, on not doing it alone. Finally, self-care. It is not selfish. We do it so that we can be present to help others. You've all been on an airplane. You have all heard the stewardess say, in the event of a sudden loss of cabin pressure, your oxygen masks will fall from the ceiling above you. If you are traveling with someone who is incapacitated or a minor, put your own oxygen mask on first and then help the other person. Okay. Jesus himself withdrew regularly to a lonely place to pray, to say, I got to off with my Father and make sure that I'm in a good place. Because people who are burned out, exhausted, just can't give their best to others, and sometimes the very person gets our worst. So this is why I'm a big fan of respite care. My mother-in-law ended up doing this. It was hard for her, but it worked really well. Small town in Wisconsin, one of the churches put together an adult daycare for people with dementia. And they had like a nurse that was a retired nurse in the congregation. They had some other folks, and they just created a safe place from 9 to 3. And you could, you had to make a reservation and that sort of thing. And I don't remember if they charged or not, but she would drop Gundy, my father-in-law, off. He had fun. He had made a couple of friends. He was always he never got mean in his dementia, but he just got forgetful, and he did get mean at home. And that gave Elaine enough time to do things like go to the grocery store and not have to worry about Gundy, and do other things, and just sometimes have lunch with a friend where she didn't have to worry about Gundy creating a scene. And it allowed her to come home and be kind, as opposed to just carrying anger and resentment. My mother-in-law's famous words were, golden years, my ass. Gundy got his dementia pretty young on into their retirement. So folks, caring for other people means taking care of yourself. And it also means, I skipped this one earlier. It's just, otherwise we end up carrying a burden that's way too big for us, and it cripples us. And then the very person we're trying to take care of, we can't be present for them because we haven't taken care of ourselves. We haven't reached out and gotten help that we need. One other thing, going back to community, I didn't put this on my slide, so I forgot about it. One of the other things community does is it does connect us with resources that we wouldn't know of on our own. And in a friendship, we don't have to have all the answers. So Judy and I are walking the dog, run into a friend in the neighborhood, and she says, hey, I got a question for you. 2 doors down, her neighbor is 80 some years old, has just fallen. The neighbor's got her in the house. She doesn't have kids around here. What's going on? How do I fix this? And I went, whew, that's a great question. I do not have an answer for you right now. So it's entirely possible when you're in a friendship or community situation to just go, I don't have an answer for you now. By the next day, I said, why don't you call so-and-so at the senior center? Why don't you do this? Here's some ideas. You know, you don't have to have all the answers right away. So those are my kind of 4 high-level ways of coping with a lean cow year. First off, just admitting it's real, reorienting to what is now doable, um, using the power of community and friendship and therapy, and then finally making sure you take care of yourself so you can actually be present with the people who are struggling. Anybody want to add anything to my list? I will gladly take it, because this is some scripture and a whole lot of experience. And that doesn't mean that I don't have a huge blind spot that I'm missing. Folks, thank you for your attention. Next week, hopefully a very happier lesson. But in the meantime, blessings on your week.